Sure. So I've been reading Schopenhauer. I read about 100 pages from one of his books called Essays and Aphorisms, which is, to my knowledge, just a bunch of his notes that he's just put together. And he had this bit, and it's a critique on reading, and for the context of this time, reading was the only kind of form of consumption. So now I think this is applied to more of a broader sort of media and other things like that. But I'm going to read out what he says, and then I've got some more thoughts on it. So he says, so every time I say reading, think consumption. Reading robs the mind of all reading. Okay. Reading robs the mind of all elasticity, as the continual pressure of a weight does a spring. The surest way of never having any thoughts of your own is to pick up a book every time you have a free moment. The thoughts of another that we have read are crumbs from another's table. Reading means letting someone else direct your thoughts. It is 100 times more valuable if you have arrived at it by thinking for yourself. So, the kind of idea about this, is we're kind of living through all these other people's beliefs and not really finding it through yourself, not kind of living through the truth. Now there's a strong counterpoint of you learn lessons that others have labored hard for, which I can't remember who said that, but when I think about the biggest lessons I've learned, they've come from my own experience. You read something like you get rich by taking risk, and you think, okay, and then you move on. But then you actually experience it yourself, and you go through the long time of not performing that behaviour, and then you realise, shit, I've got to start taking some risk now. And it's sort of ingrained in you. It's yeah, I'll leave you with that, and then I'll add some more.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of reminds me of Carl Jung saying that people don't have ideas, ideas have people. And we consume other people's thoughts and ideas all the time, even if we're not meaning to, whether it's the billboard we drive past in the car, or the article one of our friends sent us, or the book we're reading at the moment, or a YouTube video and a YouTube rabbit hole that we found ourselves falling through. We are constantly being ventriloquized by other people's opinions, even if they are, from a certain perspective, positive or beneficial for our lives. We're still adopting someone else's lessons learned from their own experience rather than experiencing it ourselves. And I think, like you said, there's two sides to it. It's a balance point. It's good to take in ideas and absorb yourself around great thinkers and great minds. That's something that I do on a very regular basis. But I think the important point is consumption without some kind of application is pointless. I think there was a video I sent you. I think I sent it to you. You might not remember it, by quite a small YouTuber. But his videos were the videography on it's amazing. I mean, he's a filmmaker background, but it's called wasn't it? It's something about. It's a video about knowledge. He used an analogy. I want to say it's. Let me look this up because I want to get this right. It was something about stop filling, start pouring, or it was a water analogy where it was start drinking. Let me have a look on. Guy's called Ali Gallup on YouTube. That's it. Stop pouring, start drinking. And he was imagining knowledge. You're filling your mind is like a glass, and you're constantly filling it up with knowledge when you're consuming stuff. But if you don't drink from that glass and actually use the knowledge in the world, well, what's the point in having it there? You're just going to overflow your cup and spill water everywhere, right? And so, yeah, I think that's very true. You can't just consume passively. It has to turn into and that doesn't necessarily have to be a behavior out in the world. It can also be a change to your interpretation on reality slightly. So something I've realized, even in the past week, very recently, is I used to find it irritating sometimes. I can read a book and finish the book and go, right, what did I actually learn there? and I can think of a few lines, but it's like, that's a 300-page book. I mean, there was so much value, potential value in there, but it hasn't stuck with me. But then what I found is, through writing regularly, asking myself most mornings what's on my mind, and a lot of it is based on something I've read, and that process of elaborating on what I've read in the written format, then actually feels like it consolidates it in my mind and actually changes the way I think about my life, and that the ideas become more concrete.
Yeah, and so I think the application, that's either an action or it's like an outlet, and actions are the ultimate like form of being, because once you've done them, that you can't take them back. They belong to the past, and you've created your stamp in history.
They kind of become real in that
He
way,
also,
you know. Like, if you want to make something real, act on it, because that changes your world. But what are you going to say? Go on.
a couple more phrases that he said that were quite impactful for me. A truth that has merely been learnt adheres to us as only an artificial limb, a false tooth. But a truth won by thinking for ourselves is like a natural limb. It alone really belongs to us. There's also this other bit where he said, people who pass their lives reading and acquire their wisdom from books are like those who learn about a country from a, let me say this again. People who pass their lives in reading and acquire their wisdom from books are like those who learn about a country from travel descriptions.
Yeah, it's like there's
That is like,
yeah. I mean, it's like there's a degree of separation between experiencing the thing firsthand and learning about it. It's not lived experience. It's something. It's valuable, but it's not a replacement. And yeah, it's useful to know. I mean, I think that's the difference between like intellectual knowledge and wisdom. You know, wisdom is, have you applied it to your life? You know, the wise man is the happy man. You can have academics that know a lot of things and have learned a lot of things, but not really applied them to their experience and made their life better for it. And so, is that wise, or is that just satisfying in some sort of strand of the ego that just wants to accrue more and more information, even if it's not being used? It's interesting, and it makes me think how little we spend with our minds, with enabling our minds to bubble up with their own ideas. How much do we sit with our thoughts on a daily basis? And you're talking personally, even if I'm in the car or I'm washing dishes or cooking food, it's like I've always got music on or a podcast. We don't spend time just letting natural thoughts and ideas bubble up from the surface.
I came to the exact same conclusion. Like, I don't spend enough time thinking. And what I actually did was I deleted Apple Music from my phone. And it's weird because, like, it's that it's been a thing that's built into me that is kind of addictive. And so now, like, I'm basically like trying to force myself to take a walk that doesn't have any headphones in, and it's kind of hard, which it almost shouldn't be. And but I want to do it because I just prefer that presence of being present and walking and thinking, and also just like taking a moment to think when I'm in a coffee shop for like half an hour, and then that is able to better guide you on like the future, your near future. And it's because it was like today we're not bored enough as people in society, whereas like when you think about how many people are doing great stuff nowadays. I feel like it's less people are, you know, trying to conquer the world because they just kind of, there's no reason to. They're not bored enough to get to find this inspiration and talent and use it.
Mm.
That they're constantly stimulated. And coming back to the the quote of it's like going to a travel, what was it, reading about a place rather than traveling to it. I just immediately thought that's like my business degree. My business degree is like reading about a place, whereas Latunia is me actually traveling to it, actually being there, which
Yeah,
I thought was an interesting bit.
yeah, that's nice. That's a nice putting two ideas together there makes a lot of sense. You know, learning about how to run a business and running a business are not the same thing. Reading a book about business is not the same as doing business. You know, nothing is the same as doing business other than doing business. Um, yeah, I mean, it's made me think about it so much. We
Well, it's maybe the same for you as well because like your psychology degree, it doesn't compare to your own psychology discoveries
yeah,
and your through speaking about them.
yeah. In a way, I my degree this year, apart from one module which was more practical, so I was able to work on sort of skills of, it was called positive psychology coaching. It was kind of like the first time practicing any kind of counseling or talking therapy. That was really useful, but everything else is either stuff that I kind of know already or doesn't really interest me, like statistics and stuff. Whereas I think I'm sort of jumping forward to where you go more specialized. You know, I want to be looking at psychoanalysis and phenomenology and, you know, existential psychology, and that's what really grips me. So you sort of have to doing the degree is necessary to move to the next path and just get a qualification. But yeah, man, I mean, it's a really important point. I think the quote from Chuck Palahniuk, the author of Fight Club and many other very successful novels, where he talks about Big Brother, and George Orwell's idea of the totalitarian state being one that controls us by force and power and violence, not being the case, and actually the way we're being limited, in inverted commas. I'm not saying that that's really what the world is trying to do to us, but Big Brother is more capturing your attention so much through different sources of dopaminergic stimulation and convenience that you don't spend time sitting with your mind and then having your intuition bubble up to the surface and help you direct your actions on what you want to do. I mean, like we said, we don't sit with our thoughts, and I think there is an awareness inside the human being that knows fundamental truths about our lives that we have to stop and listen to. And that's like, where does my interest in psychology come from? I don't know. I wasn't saying it since the age of 12. It's like there's this guiding force inside me. And if I hadn't stopped playing video games when I was 15, and I kept spending the many hours of my free time playing Fortnite and Rainbow Six Siege and FIFA, would I have given my brain the space to listen to this spirit that I feel is inside of me that's guiding me towards psychology and spirituality and philosophy? You know, would that voice have just been so quiet and I would have cared more about my ultimate team on FIFA, or, you know, how many wins I had on Fortnite? It's interesting questions.
Do you know what it comes back to? That internal, external, that we need to focus more on what the inside is trying to direct us rather than the outside. And that's what I'd probably say to people in trying to how people listening can apply this, because you don't want to necessarily consume nothing, but you don't want to um, be consuming all the time. So there's a balance between that, but it's also like giving yourself enough space, as you said, to live your own path.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. There's a thing the exact quote eludes me, but there's a modern psychoanalyst called James Hollis, and he has this quote about rather than looking out in the world for what you should desire, manifest the spirit inside of you that desires to be actualized out in the world, or something like that. Like rather than looking at the external world for what you think you should be aiming for, look internally at what's there and wants to be manifested and bring that out into the world. Really nice frame, really nice.
Do you know what I thought as well? Because we're in a position where we're more, when we've got higher self-esteem, and we're maybe living more of a meaningful life, and maybe are closer to self-actualization. I feel like a lot of, on the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, a lot of our belongingness is lacking as a result of it. So then we find ourselves in very weird kind of states of needs, and like that's probably one of the reasons we feel like ostracized. And yeah.
It's an interesting one. I like Monday this week. I had a free day. Like I took a rest day from training, and I'm not at uni at the moment. And I decided to just go on a bit of an adventure. I dressed up a little bit, and I went to go to a reasonably well-known library in London, and that sort of fell flat on its face because it was so busy you could barely even get a seat there. But I went on a bit of an adventure and did a bit of work and stuff. But I enjoyed the day. I saw some nice scenery and had some peace and quiet. But there was this looming sense within me that it would have been great to have somebody there to share it with. And I think that's my life is pretty good. I'm very great. I'm extremely grateful, in fact, for where I'm at this age. But the one thing I'm missing is more people that I can feel like I really connect with. I have people that I meet day to day, and I have people that I do things with, especially in the basketball community and at university and stuff. But the number of people that I can be the Joel that I am on the podcast with is very few. But it's like, okay, well, would I rather trade my skills in and be more socially integrated, but not do the podcast and not have the thoughts that I have and the ideas I have? No, I wouldn't trade that for the world. So it's just the cost of doing business. It's a feature of the game. It's not a bug. It's just how it works. And I know that through pursuing this path, I'll find people like I did, rekindling my friendship with you. You'll find people on the way that resonate. It's just a bit of a waiting game sometimes. And it's difficult when you have to go into environments where you don't resonate on that kind of level. And, they do find this side of me weird or abnormal. But that's life.
There was this very interesting clip that I saw from a podcaster called Mel Robbins, and she said there's something called the Great Scatter, which happens in society when everyone leaves uni and they all go their different directions, and they all scatter from each other, and those friends that you've built up, and then you start to text, and you try and move your relationship forward, but slowly those texts fade, and then it's your friendships are more based on convenience of area and things like that. And I feel like the solution for us and other people that are coming towards their end of the degree and things like that is to start setting up so that when you have that great scatter, you've got something to fall on. Like, you've got friends that you're going to be continue calling weekly, and also, like, I look at my relationship with my mentor for an example, and I see myself after the degree being, if like, the same level of close with him, because we've built up this shared interest, where we're part of a very small community of people that try and attempt these marketing stunts, and so, like, that's kind of an example of me sort of setting up, like, I don't know, it's finding people that are like you, so like you that you wouldn't have a reason to stop talking.
Yeah. Well, if you think about it, throughout secondary school, you're with the same group of people there and thereabouts for the 5 to 7 years that you'll be there, and you all have to be there because it's part of your education, and you form your social groups within that larger social group, and there are familiar faces and stuff, and you rub along and you make jokes and you get on in class and you help each other with your homework, and maybe you hang out on the weekends if you're like that real tight-knit group. And then that ends. This is something, it's become quite prevalent to me over the past year or two, is how convenient the like access to a social scene school was, because you all kind of bundled together. And then when you leave that environment, all the ones that you sort of hung out with because that's just how it was, you were kind of just thrust together and you got along, they kind of fade away. And it's only the people that want similar things to you and have a similar frame of mind and way of looking at the world that actually stay with you. And I like that a lot. I haven't heard that before. The great scatter is really nice.
She also said that it takes like 200 hours spent together to make a close friend or something. Like, that's ridiculous. That's a lot of time you need to spend together with someone.
Yeah, man. And it's because I think it takes time for all the filters and the facades to dissolve. That's what a real friend is. It's probably a great definition for it, is the person you have no filter around.
When you first make that move to let someone know who you are, I had that, and it's. I remember having that like 6 months ago, and when it's. I think there is a moment. I think you can like convert a friend to a close friend with like that one thing that really gets them to discover you on a deeper level and that they like.
Yeah, like this year I had 3 1-hour sessions with a sports psychologist for free through this organization called TAS. I think it's the Talented Athlete Scholarship Scheme. I think that's what it stands for. And I'd like to think he'd say the same, because he made comments similar to this when we finished our sessions. But because I was able to have a deep chat with this guy, like that's basically what it was. It was an organized deep chat around my psychological landscape when it comes to sport. I felt like I actually got quite close to him within that 3-hour period. It's almost like, because I was able to open up and be honest, many of my filters that I would have initially with a stranger dissolve very quickly. So maybe that 200 hours rule is a good starting point or way of thinking about it. But it's how quickly maybe you pursue depth. You get through the small talk that you'd have with anyone, and actually maybe vulnerability and humility are a key to it. Pointing out to someone that the very human things about you, your weird idiosyncrasies and imperfections, and there's something reciprocal about that. When you open up to me off and on the podcast, and I'm non-judgmental, and I take in what you say and I tell you the truth, then I reciprocate the same thing and tell you stories about my life that I wouldn't tell the average stranger. And then together you're kind of bonded in that. There's an emotional rope between the two of you because you've shared real deep insight about yourself that you wouldn't just share to everyone. There's an inclusivity in it. So yeah, I mean, real friends are hard to find and nurture. But I think the one great thing about our relationship and relationships I have with my very close friends in life is that it always seems to be that truth as a foundation of it. Like, if there's anything that we disagree with or that we don't like, it's like we have to approach it immediately. There's no fakeness. There's no superficiality.
Yeah. I think you're quite good at that, like, through being, like, playing the role of a good friend.
I mean, I have it with someone I've met quite recently and become friends with in basketball. Like, I'll tell them the truth about what I think of a certain team or a certain player or my own abilities, point out my weaknesses on a very harsh level, because that's what I'm like. And people like that, I think. It might be uncomfortable at face value, but if you tell someone the truth, unless they're really deeply insecure about it, they like it a lot. I mean, I find it for myself, right? if a mentor says to me something I find uncomfortable but I know is true, it makes me want to be with them and spend time with them more. It makes me value their opinion more. Because if you just tell me what I want to hear, how can I trust you?
It's like when you got confronted by one of your basketball teammates about that picture where you were looking at the guy taking a shot.
Yeah, it's just the reality of it. Like, I feel like there's a line, of course, there's a line, but you have to push further towards truth. You don't want to go over the line where you're too blunt and you hurt someone's feelings. That's not what I'm saying. But you know, me and my housemate have this thing now that sometimes in life you should be able to just say no without giving a reason. Like someone says, "Oh, Joel, do you want to go and do this?" No. Well, that's fine. That should be okay. Or like Joel, like do you like? Have you seen this new show? No. Do you like this? Do you like this restaurant chain? No. Joel, did you watch my video? No. Like, it's fine to say no, guys. There's no actual. It's not a value judgment on you. It's not an evaluation of you as an individual. I'm just saying no. It's just the truth. No. You know.
When you think about it though, like every time you say no, you feel like you have to follow it up with something.
Yeah. Yeah. Why can't we just say no? I don't know. It's a weird one. I mean, I think it's because we don't want to hurt people's feelings, but we should all have a level of humility that if I say to somebody, do you think I am, or let's say, in a basketball context, would you play me over this player? Right? I'm using literally myself as an example. Would you play me or this guy? And someone says, no, Joel, I'd play them. Like, it hurts. It does hurt because that's them saying, like, this person is better than you, but maybe they are better than me. And maybe I should know that. And that's important. Do you know what I mean? It's like, it's a really good skill to be able to deal with hard truths.
What's that quote? If you can't trust my no, then how can you trust my yes?
Exactly this, Jake. And think about it this way, right? I think there's a clear link between I know what I'm shit at, right? And I know that I have many, many flaws. But because of that, I'm very confident of the things I know I'm good at. I think there's a link there. I know that I am not the most competent when it comes to performing environments where there are large personalities, and I tend to recede into myself. If I'm around people that get me and are sort of on my wavelength, then I can be this charismatic bloke. But sometimes I recede into myself. I get nervous, right? The weasel voice starts winning, and I get that. That's a flaw of mine, and that's something I'm trying to work on mentally. Or I also very sort of susceptible to my own ego, right? And I know that it can get in the way, and it's not always helpful. But because I recognize my flaws, I can also go back, Joel, you can write well and speak well. And like, you can shoot certain shots in basketball well. And it's like, can you really accept your strengths and believe in them if you don't also believe in your weaknesses? I'm just playing with ideas.
No, it's good. It's like kind of thinking of yourself like as you are, rather than like a version that, rather than it's kind of being honest with yourself, and knowing your own self very well, for its weaknesses and its strengths.
I'd much rather believe in who I am than who I want to be, because who I want to be is a vision, it's an ideal, but it's not real. Whereas who I am is it can be seen in a very positive light, but it's complex, and there's both sides to it. But yeah, do we touch on some points that we actually had written for this episode? I mean, they're flowing well, but
No, I'll let you go now. Yeah, your turn.
well, pick one of my three, because you've got it. You probably can get it up, and I'm happy to talk about any of these three. So whichever one it makes you interested the most.
Let's go with the two worlds of the left and right hemisphere.
Yeah, you've picked the hardest one for me to articulate, but this is good. So do you remember in the episode with, I think his name was Kai, the philosophy Instagram guy, and I talked about differences between the left and right hemisphere, but I did it very sort of broadly, and it was from a book that I'd read 6 months ago, and it was quite incoherent, not how I'd like it to be. Do you remember that ish?
I thought it was a good point.
Well, maybe it was good at the time, but I've reconsumed some of the research and the thought behind this. It's from a guy called Ian McGilchrist. Listened to him on a couple of podcasts this week, and his work is on differences in the left and right hemisphere of the brain, and this stuff really fascinates me. So I'll go into me ramble, and then we'll see where this branches. But essentially, right, the common thought over the 20th century as research emerged around the two hemispheres of the brain was that they had specific functions that were different. But that's largely been disproven now. And that functions like language or I don't know, motor patterns and facial recognition and stuff, they might be more localized on one hemisphere than the other, but generally the hemispheres work together to produce our behavior and our abilities to navigate the world and things. But the key difference that Ian McGilchrist talks about is the different ways that the hemispheres attend to the world. So the type of attention that they pay to the world. And you could reframe that attending to the world, you can reframe that as the hemispheres exist within two different worlds, based on the same physical plane that we live in, but the world that they attend to, the world they perceive, is different. And I might have touched on this in that episode, but I'll elaborate on this a little bit more. So the left hemisphere attends to the world as a series of decontextualized parts, right, that we can grasp and we can use for certain functions. Whereas the right hemisphere views the world in its whole context, right? Rather than seeing the small parts that we can maybe manipulate ourselves, the right hemisphere sees everything as it is, right? And it's kind of the way Ian McGilchrist talks about it is the left hemisphere attempts to break down and decontextualize the world of the right hemisphere. The left hemisphere creates a map of the world that the right hemisphere lives within. So let me give you some kind of example of this. A bird, I think it's a certain type, I want to say it might even be a domestic chicken, but I could be wrong about that. It's a type of bird. We looked at this study in A-level, and Ian McGilchrist talks a lot about birds and their two hemispheres of the brain. But essentially, I'll go along the lines that it's a chicken. I could be wrong. But this bird, it uses one eye, right? The right eye that links to the left hemisphere looks at the kind of the seeds that it's trying to peck at with its beak to eat. Whereas the left eye that's linked to the right hemisphere is looking around for predators. It's like these two kind of worlds. One is looking at this specific, very fine, detailed function of pecking at a seed in order to eat it. And the other eye is looking at the whole environment in its context, looking for potential danger. Now, why am I interested in this? Why does it matter? That's more important. It's important to me because I think the right hemisphere world is what Korzybski, this writer, called the unspeakable world that Alan Watts has talked about in many of his lectures. Which means that the right hemisphere deals with the world in its full complex context. So if we'd say use Alan Watts' example that he talks about in one of his talks, is he talks about looking at a leaf. Now what the left hemisphere wants to do is put that object into categories. Okay, it's a green thing, comes from nature, photosynthesizes, it's made up of a series of plant cells, that kind of stuff. Whereas the right hemisphere looks at that leaf in its whole context of that's a piece of Mother Nature. That's part of a large tree. That's part of a forest. It's a bit of life, right? Does that make sense? I feel like I'm kind of waffling here. The
No,
other interesting thing about
definitely interesting.
the other interesting thing about the right hemisphere is that it regulates our ability to understand things like metaphor and poetry, right? The right hemisphere world is better expressed through things like narrative and myths and music and art, rather than the left hemisphere things that are more like sort of objective science. And this is interesting. This is another example that I'll put in that kind of deals with this point that the right hemisphere is to do with metaphor. You need your right hemisphere to understand things like sarcasm. So let's say me and you are playing a board game, right? And I'm finding it boring. And I say, this is exciting, in that tone, right? Your left hemisphere hears the words and derives their meaning, which is, I'm saying this is exciting, which means I'm enjoying it. Whereas the right, and that's kind of out of the context of my tone and the environment we're in and the way my body language and my facial expression and stuff. Whereas the right hemisphere looks at everything in its full context, the way I've said the thing I've said, to understand the underlying meaning, which is that it's not exciting and that I'm being sarcastic. Now, does that make sense?
Yeah,
So
this is
my proposal at the end of the waffle. Now, Ian McGilchrist's book called The Master and His Emissary then goes on to talk about how the world that we live in has become much more. What's the right word to use? It's much more left hemisphere dominant.
yeah,
So we're looking to
yeah. I
optimize,
definitely
right? We're looking to break things down and understand them, and then try and use that as our advantage as human beings, inventing things, innovating, building things, grasping at things. Whereas the right hemisphere is maybe being less spoken about and appreciated. You know, our generation's view on art and music compared to 150 years ago might be very different. These right hemisphere ways of thinking, I think spirituality and religion are very right hemisphere. There's a lot of metaphor, a lot of art, a lot of symbolism, a lot of narrative. We're losing that side of our lives. And a nice way of thinking about it is the left hemisphere regulates the known world, right? The things that we can grasp and understand. Whereas the right hemisphere regulates the unknown, the territory that's not yet been explored. And in my life, I want to, not all the time, but I want to work on my ability to see the world through the right hemisphere, to appreciate art, to appreciate poetry, to appreciate mythology. And yes, use the left hemisphere when I need it, and still have that rational scientific capacity in my mind. But when I drop into the unspeakable world, the world of the right hemisphere that sees the beauty and complexity as it is, not needing to explain it with words or images, and experiencing it at its truest level, the more I do that, you find a level of peace in that. So I've just talked a lot there, but tell me what you think.
I really like it. I really like it. It makes a lot of things make sense. Like it's kind of like the thing that's built in you to make you like certain people more conscientious, certain people more open.
Mm.
It sounds like the right hemispheres where like your creative sort of thoughts come from, like your play, and that's kind of one of our goals of the podcast. It's like that's where open mindedness comes from. That's where looking deeper comes from. That right hemisphere, and yeah, I don't like it's kind of also maybe rational versus irrational, and there's a lot of society that I can agree with that point of that they're becoming heavily left hemisphere. So what I would then ask is then how do we become more right hemisphere?
Mm. It's a great question. Having appreciation for truths and beauty that words don't do justice. That's how you tip into the right hemisphere. You know, if you listen to a real beautiful piece of music, it's a right hemisphere experience. You can't really describe, like, listen to a great opus from a grand sort of composer from the Baroque period, right? You can't really describe what that's like in words. Yeah, it sounds nice. It's beautiful. You're using a word to describe an experience, which is very, very suboptimal. And you listen or you watch a Shakespeare play. The left hemisphere will look at the specific narrative that's going on between the characters, but the right hemisphere attends to the fact that Shakespeare's play is representing a fundamental component of human nature, right? It's like seeing the like we say, the deeper context behind things, slipping into that world. How do you do it? I mean, I think this is one of those questions where I have to say, do I have a complete answer to that? I don't know. I would say surrounding yourself with things like art and music and poetry and narrative and metaphor, the things that the right hemisphere feed on, in inverted commas.
But to go into the kind of sort of science behind it, is this something that we can grow? It's not like something that you're born with more of a right or a left.
I'd have to look into it more. In terms of the actual science on that, I don't know. I would like to presume that we have a certain disposition to favor one worldview over another, but I think it can definitely change across time. It's very malleable, and maybe
Yeah.
a component of things like, I don't know, psychedelic experiences or religious experiences, people tap into that right hemisphere way of thinking. And I think way of thinking limits it. It's more of a way of being. It's a way of approaching reality. Like, I was definitely, like, maybe it's just a part of my development, just physical development, going through puberty and going into my late teens. But there was no consideration of the right hemisphere world when I was a kid. I had the same view of many people have, that going to art galleries is silly and a waste of time. Whereas these days, that sounds like a great afternoon. So I don't know. It's interesting. But what's the takeaway from all this waffle is that there are two ways of looking at the world and life, in a way. You can look at it at face value, or you can question what's maybe the underlying meaning of the things that we do, and what's underneath the kind of mental construction you've put over the world that you can understand and use. What about the world that you can't understand? What about the things you don't know? What about the things you can't explain? What about the things that are so beautiful or so terrifying or evoke awe in you that you can't just describe with words, like when you see a sunset, or you're confronted with the size of the ocean, or when you're in a forest and you just have that sense of peace in nature? What is that? What is that world we don't know?
Yeah, my solution would be this illusion face value world isn't the funnest world to be in. It's better to strip back the layers and discover the doors of perception and things like that. So I like to think that I would assume most individuals have adequate amount of each hemisphere that you're born with and that you can work on. So there's something there, and you just need to expose yourself, and then from repeated exposure, it might grow. Like that, because me before the podcast was maybe more of a right hemisphere person, and that first podcast we did, where you spoke about ideas that I've never even heard of, but that hit me, and then that I thought really interested me, that exposed me, and so I think I got them the wrong way around.
Yeah.
So that was my left, but then my right hemisphere took those ideas and wanted to expose myself to more, and now that's where I'm kind of at now. Or there's a shortcut, which is just do psychedelics
Do
and
loads
it'll
of
do
drugs.
it for you.
Yeah, it is. It's like, I do see there's two kind of views to this stuff. It's either Joel Sharp, like the world is just what it is, or no, there is more going on. And I prefer to live my life with the philosophy that there is more going on. But yeah, let's conclude that there. Well, talk to me about these archetypes that you've noted down here, because I'm interested.
Sure. So I basically thought that from your discussion about the myth and the hero's journey, Joseph Campbell's from last week,
Yep.
I thought that there were more things than just that's fundamentally engraved within us, that's stories. So these take the form of fables, where when you read them as a kid, that like I'll start with fables maybe first. So you read as a kid the story of the tortoise and the hare,
Mm.
and that is a moral story about a tortoise beating a hare in a race
Mm.
because he's slow and steady.
Mm.
What does that say fundamentally about the human experience? Well, if you put 10 years into something,
Mm.
then you're going to beat the guy who blows up um, all suddenly, and then he gets lazy, he gets hedonistic,
Mm.
and he then gets overtaken by you. There's so and I just see that as built into us. I mean, there's loads and loads of fables out there. There's isn't there one about a lion in a cave where like people start bringing him food? I might have it written down. I'll have a look. But yeah, let me know your thoughts on the tortoise and the hare
Yeah,
one.
yeah, no, really, really, really. Like, it's it. That's it, Jacob. That's showing me that you've understood what we've been talking about. Because that is, as weird as it's gonna sound, the tortoise and the hare is a mythological story. It's a narrative that symbolizes something fundamental about human beings, which is that don't be the guy that rushes, right? The tortoise wins because he's patient and he's humble and he's steady and he's wise. The hare might have all the speed in the world, but he rushes into things and he loses his judgment and he gets distracted. And I like that point of hedonism. Maybe he gets that early success and he beats the tortoise in the first half of the race. So then he gets distracted by the beautiful lady hare on the side of the road that tempts him in, or he finds a source of food and he gorges himself until he has to then sleep for 12 hours just to rest after that massive meal or something. Whereas the tortoise knows, tortoise buys his time. He's wise, and it's silly. You're smiling and I'm smiling because it almost sounds silly that we're deconstructing a story you read about when you're 6 years old, but it's true, and that's why as a kid you recognise something cool in that. We all remember the tortoise and the hare because it's baffling to us that the tortoise beat the hare, but somehow we understand it.
And you know what, Joel? I reckon in some abstract thing, um, some abstract point that all these stories come together
Mm.
because like this when the hare starts becoming hedonistic, that he's tempted by something, and there comes Jung's archetype of the temptress,
Mm.
and also the femme fatale, and um, the woman in the red dress from the Matrix. It's all the same.
Yeah, the woman in the red dress.
Um,
That's such a brilliant analogy. Wow. Yeah, I remember Hormozy talking about that. You know, the in this. I think I'm also Greg McEwen. I haven't read the book, but his book Essentialism, talking about the problems that arise through getting successful is the more opportunities open up, and then you take those opportunities, and then you put less time into the thing that made you successful, and you decline. It's something that that podcast you sent me, really early Joe Rogan, like in the 400s, where he had Robert Greene on for the first time, and they talk about that pattern of someone being successful, not being patient and humble, and getting distracted and falling off. I mean, that's in a way all of that truth is squeezed into a story like the tortoise and the hare. I mean, it's I love this. I love this a lot.
so if so to be clear on kind of what we're talking about for the listeners, on the Rogan podcast, Robert Greene said, if you get it right first time, it's a curse.
Yes, yes.
And the theory behind that is that you then think you probably become incredibly narcissistic. You think I think he used the words untouchable.
Yeah.
And to talk about the woman in the red dress, this is some theory that I think Hormozy popularized of when they're in the Matrix. There's a scene in the first Matrix with Neo, and he's like running behind Morpheus, and there's this woman in a red dress that passes him, and he looks, and Morpheus says, "What did you just do?" And the woman in the red dress transforms into an agent, which is like the bad guy from the Matrix.
Mm.
And this is used as a metaphor of I think you actually kind of explained it. Yeah, things that when you become successful, there's more opportunities, but there's more women in the red dress. There's more of this kind of lustful, tempting business ideas and pleasures and things, and they try to take your distraction, but you've got to focus and ignore them. And the woman in the red dress gets big as well, the more successful you come.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's in that scene, I might be wrong, but Neo passes the woman in the red dress and is distracted by her, and then Morpheus goes, "Were you listening to me, or were you looking at the woman in the red dress?" And then Neo turns to look at the woman again, and she's turned into the bad guy. It's like, "Are you listening?" Morpheus is like this. He's like the God character, basically, in that story. He's the divine father. He's the source of wisdom, right? And Neo is like the hero, that's in the unknown, and he's going through the trials and tribulations and the transformation. And he's supposed to be listening to his mentor and learning these things, but then he's distracted. He's not listening to the wisdom. He's distracted by the woman in the red dress, who is the bad guy, like a symbol of like that's what's leading you off the straight and narrow path. Really, really interesting. Yeah, it's once I wrap my head around this stuff, man, you just see it in life. Like I could. It's kind of like the woman in the red dress doesn't necessarily have to be something attractive and new. It can also be the inclination to settle. Like get to a certain point in life and just coast. Now, I'm not advocating like hustle culture, nose to the grindstone, white knuckle bear your way through life and just work. No. What I'm saying is, once you get to a certain point of like excellence in something, keep going. Like, don't just stop and settle on that. If it's still meaningful to you, keep going. Because there will be this, it's the same thing in Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. He talks about a specific stage where the hero goes through this cycle of initiation, or departure, initiation, and return. He returns to the known, and now there's this inclination to stay there. Because you've accrued some wisdom, you've learned some stuff, you've brought some value to your community, and you're back in the known world. But Campbell talks about the need to push through this inclination to settle and go back into the unknown to go on another adventure. So it's the same thing.
And to link it to another kind of form, I think maybe in Greek mythology, where this character of Medusa, this also could be some sort of woman in the red dress type theme. When you stare at something, and and then you turn to stone because of it. I feel like that's got some kind of symbolism behind it. Why do people look at Medusa? Isn't she guarding something?
I'm going to have a look at it now. Mythological meaning behind Medusa story. She is protecting something. But yeah, that thing if you look at it, it turns to stone. Maybe actually we think about it in a. I don't know if I might be just unconsciously referencing Jordan Peterson, which might be one of my pathologies. But I feel like he's talked about the Medusa story and its associations with post-traumatic stress disorder in the context of war veterans. That he talks about them being struck with so much fear because they've confronted pure evil. Whether they've seen their friends die in war, or, in the worst case, they've seen pure evil in themselves. Right? They've had to kill an innocent person, and they were sort of brainwashed by whatever their, whoever I don't know who run. I'm not well versed in this kind of stuff, but they were convinced to go on a certain mission to achieve a certain goal, protecting their country and stuff, and they saw malevolence come out of themselves, and because of that, they experienced so much fear and guilt and pain in that then they have post-traumatic stress disorder, and their mind can't move past the fact that they witnessed pure evil. And maybe Medusa is that, right? You see this symbol of pure evil, this lady with snakes in her hair, and it freezes you because you see evil at its purest form. I don't know, I'm playing with ideas, but
I think,
interesting.
yeah, I think you're onto something of like, I think my sort of more view is you is like chasing something and you kind of can't handle it. There's a Kanye line that's like, "Don't stare at money too long." It's Medusa. Like you chase that thing, and then
You're stuck. You're stuck chasing.
yeah, yeah, you're trapped in. You might get it, but like it it traps you because you've got nowhere to go. You now have this absolute massive pile of responsibility, or that's what it is, isn't it? Turning to stone, that is being trapped.
Mm, yeah, yeah. I mean, it's interesting. You bring up the desires point. Like I realize I've talked about this before, but the fact that I don't want to desire outcomes, maybe it's a similar way of thinking about it. I fixate so much on, say, I want to go to under 23 World Championships in 6 months' time, and I want to be a important part of the team and lead us to a medal and stuff. But all of that is like external outcome. Thinking about the medal or being a certain player in the team environment. That's something that I can't really control, and I can fixate so much on that when it comes to the moments of pressure, when it matters, when I have to perform, when I'm given an opportunity, I freeze because I've been fixating so much on that outcome. Whereas instead, I want to have the process-oriented mindset of I just want to be in the best shape possible come June. Like that's the only thing, because that's under my control. Just be the best player I've ever been by June 2025. Everything else is just whatever happens. Then I'm not frozen in that fear
Yeah,
because whatever does happen, I still know that I achieved my goal, which was to get into the best shape I've ever been in.
and that freezing could, like you said, have an analysis of settling, because you could get your gold medal, and then you could be like, I'm done. I've just got a gold medal in the Paralympics. Like that's the great achievement, and that's the top achievement you can get in sport. I'm done, and then go live and then settle.
Mm, mm, yeah, I feel like it depends. There's a difference between settling and deciding when you're done. There's the I like it's kind of like a Robert Greene's was it one of the last chapters in 48 Laws of Power where he talks about knowing where victory is and then when you've achieved it and then when to stop. There's two
Yeah,
sides to it. There's settling and knowing when something is done. Um, and so yeah, I get your point about settling with freezing. It's like you get to a certain point and then you're kind of frozen in that area because you no longer want to put the effort in that's got you where you are. But I also think there's a point of when you finish something, if that's the thing you aim for and you got it, then don't keep being frozen staring at this more and more money or more and more status or more and more accolades, and actually call something done when it's done.
There's another fable that I read up on in preparation for this. Well, I didn't read up on it, but I looked into it a tiny bit, and it's I think it's called the Scorpion and the Frog. You might recognise it because Peterson talked about it on Rogan, where I think there's three animals, but I couldn't find the third. It's basically where there's a frog, a scorpion, and something else, and they need to cross a river, and the I think it's the frog's the only one that can travel, but I think
I do
I
remember
think
the
I need
story.
to
If you
Google
want me to retell it? So
it.
I
Yeah.
think I do. I think I do. From my understanding, the frog, semi-aquatic animal, can cross the river happily. Scorpion doesn't like the water, right? Needs to get across the river. Scorpion goes to the frog. Oi, mate, can I ride on your back across the river? Because I need to get over. You know what I mean? I don't like the water. You can swim. Happy days. Frog goes, I'm not sure about that, mate. Because you're a scorpion. And you're probably going to sting me. And that'll be quite unpleasant. And I'll die. So no, thank you. Scorpion then replies, well, think about it. Why would I sting you? Because we're both traveling along the river. If I sting you during the traveling across the river and you die, I'll die as well because I'll drown because I can't swim. So I wouldn't do that. That's silly. We're both helping each other out here. You're going to get me across the river. I'm not going to kill you. Frog thinks about it. Goes, yeah, right then. I'll give you a ride across the river. And then what happens during the journey? The scorpion stings the frog dies, and the scorpion drowns. And as they're dying and losing their last gasps of breath, the frog asks the scorpion, well, why did you sting me? You said you wouldn't. And the scorpion just says, because it's in my nature. And the moral of that story is, it's very difficult to transcend and move past our parts of our sort of our nature. And think about that from human perspectives. We're always going to do things that are irrational and don't make sense and don't always serve us, and we hurt people and we do immoral things. And that doesn't mean that we're cursed as a race. It just means these things are part of our nature, and they're things that we shouldn't look down upon, but things that we should talk about and try and negotiate and work with, because they are parts of our biological nature. Well, what are your thoughts on that story?
The river represents adventure. The I think one of them something to do with trust.
Mm,
The toad is trust, maybe, and and then the scorpion would have to be something that's like is gonna betray you because it's their nature.
mm,
But yeah, it basically comes back to like another story that is some sort of meaning in the human experience.
yeah, yeah, exactly, man. And you know, it's so funny that it's a story about a frog and a scorpion crossing a river, but how does that reflect human the capacity of humans? If it does, it's so that's why I love metaphor, love myth. It's very interesting. Should we start concluding with some closing remarks, or is there a final point you want to make before we wrap up?
I'll make I'll make one more. This is from Alex O'Connor, and he's referencing a book called Blaise Pascal Ponce, where a gambling addict is offered all the money he could have won on the condition that he can't play anymore. And he won't want to play. But allow the gambling addict to play the game, and he's guaranteed not to win the money. You're going to make him upset. He's not going to want to play. So you need to have the thing desired, along with the illusion that once you get the thing, that will make you happy.
Mm.
And Alex took that and he thought of it of like evolutionary. You wouldn't know if you're going to eat, but you'd have that illusion of when you eat, it's going to make you safe. And he also referenced it as a criticism of religion, of like how you're always, the thing you're seeking is enlightenment and this closer connection to God, but you're never going to get there on that one-to-one for your whole life, but it's what keeps you going. And I think, yeah, it's another one of these things it's very true that it's always like desire, outcome, get there. Another desire, outcome, get there. I think the religious point's a bit different because you never get there. But yeah,
I think an analogy I use in one of my next videos that are coming up is that we're all donkeys following carrots on a stick, right? And that's quite a depressing analogy in a way. You know, you don't want to think that you're a donkey just being manipulated to follow a carrot that it's never quite going to reach because it's always, 50 centimeters in front of its nose. But it's something, it's similar, it links to maybe this frog and scorpion story. It's in our nature as human beings that we want an aim and we want a journey, a game, an adventure, pick whatever word you want to use, moving towards that aim. Now, what that story says about the gambler is you don't just want the outcome and you don't just want the game with no outcome. You want game and outcome, right? You want the carrot on the end of the stick, but you also want the journey moving towards this ever distant carrot that you never quite reach. And so that's important to know for you as a human being. You are this donkey following this carrot on a stick. You are the gambler that wants the game and the outcome, not just one or the other. And so you set some goals in your life that you'll never achieve, but you'll enjoy the process of moving towards them. Or pick goals where the goalposts always move. You want, there's no, I talk about it in the video of finite and infinite games. Improving your relationships with friends and family and loved ones and partners, that's an infinite game. You never get to a point where your friendships or your family relations or your romantic relationship is as best it could possibly be. That's always an aim that you're constantly moving towards. It's an outcome and a game you can play to try and achieve the outcome. Or if it's in your career, don't think about a certain amount of money or a material resource you want to buy. Think about your skill set within that domain. Because that's an infinite game. You never can be as good as you can possibly be at your job, whatever that is. You can always be trying to push the goalposts and move the needle. So then that aim, that carrot on the stick, you're a donkey following a carrot on a stick. You're never going to get there. But why can't we be happy donkeys? Right? Why can't we be all right with that process? It's in our nature. We want an aim and we want a way to move towards the aim. And it's in the movement towards the aim that we experience meaning and positive emotion. And that's all you've got as a human being. So, yeah, I like it, man.
Where you say you've got to kind of smile through it. It's the suffering that you've got to kind of smile through, because that the gambling addict may not know it, but they want to lose a little bit because it makes them want to win it more. And with all these things, desired outcomes, that's what comes with it is the failure. So that's what you got to be okay with.
Yeah, it's something that Kai said in that episode. Imagine Sisyphus smiling. You know that myth about the guy that pushes this massive boulder up the hill, and just as he reaches the top, the massive rock rolls back down the hill, and he does this process forever and ever and ever. Constant effort, constant suffering. But imagine him smiling and enjoying that process. That's what you are as a human. Your brain is not designed to be happy. Your brain is designed to try really hard. That's a quote from an evolutionary psychologist, and I've forgotten their name, and I apologize. But I think that's a nice place to conclude this episode. I've enjoyed it, man. We've touched on some good areas, some areas that weave together, some areas that are separate, but overall, I've enjoyed today. So thank you.
I haven't gone through both your points though. Your two left, so I just save them for the next week.
They can be in the bank, or life goes on, man. There's always an infinite things to say and finite time to say them. So that's the nature of it.
Sure. Okay. Look, we'll touch on those next time. Thank you everyone for listening. I hope you enjoyed this as much as we did. Oh, well, one thing I'm going to start saying as well. If you did enjoy this, can you leave a 5-star on Spotify? Because that's basically the biggest thing that pushes Spotify's recommendations. Appreciate it.